So what I thought would be nice to do would actually be allow you to do a very tight MCT diet as from one of the trials, and then we could discuss how you think in practice that would work and how your own practice might differ from that to see how you could make it more flexible or liberate it. But before I start, MCT fat, just to keep you up to speed on the science, so we have short chain, medium triglycerides, which are your lengths of 4 to 6. We have the medium chain triglycerides, which are your carbon lengths 8 to 12, and then your long chain triglycerides, which are 16 carbon units plus. And I think those, if you think she forgot to mention 14, I think the 14 length ones kind of falls between the mediums and the long chains. Medium chains you probably come across in other areas of your dietetics and the special features that they have. So if you've ever looked after babies who have guts that are damaged or have been surgically operated on, then you'll have been used to using MCT baby milks. And that uses the property of MCT fat that they are absorbed in a different way to the long chain fats. They don't need the chylomicrons. And so when you have a damaged gut, you will mix some MCT fat in with your LCT fat and you get better absorption. Does that all tie in with your experience? Yeah. And then if you've ever looked after patients with a chylothorax, that same property of a different way of absorbing is used. It doesn't go into the lymphatic drainage system, and so if you need to give that system a rest, you don't give LCT fat, but you can give your energy as MCT fat. So another very useful property of MCT fat. And then those of you who've worked in metabolic dietetics, the MCT fat's special property of having a different enzyme. So you have your long chain acyl dehydrogenase enzymes, which take your long chain fats down in the mitochondria as you burn them. And then you have your medium chain acyl-CoA dehydrogenase enzymes, which take the shorter length fats down in the mitochondria when you burn them. And then you have your short chain acyl-CoA dehydrogenase enzymes, which take the shorter ones down. And so in diseases where you don't have those enzymes for the long chain fats, you can feed these children medium chain fats quite safely and give them a reasonable portion of their energy in a fat that they can metabolize. And I think if I remember rightly, you can go up to about, or it's recommended, about 25% of your energy comes from MCT fat in these children, and that has quite a sparing effect in exercise in terms of muscle integrity. So if any of you use MCT fats they're the same MCT fats, and you'll have worked with the parameters of how much you can give safely before you start to run into problems of tolerance. And then in 1970s, Hutalocker first described the property of using MCT fats for its third magical property in that it doesn't require carnitine to get into the mitochondria. So one of the rate-limiting steps for you burning free fatty acids is actually getting them into the mitochondria to go onto that acyl-CoA dehydrogenase spiral, which I'm sure you can all remember from your biochemistry days. And I haven't put a slide up on that today, lest you think, oh no, it's a biochemistry slide, we're not coping with that. So you don't need carnitine to get medium chain free fatty acids into your mitochondria, and so you bypass that rate limiting step, and that gives you what Hutalocker first described was that great surge of acetyl-CoA coming off those dehydrogenase activity, and that surge into ketones. So the special feature of MCT fat in a ketogenic diet is you get this surge of ketones coming from it for quite a small amount of fat. And he described a 60% MCT fat diet. Then Ruby Schwartz in the late 80s said, well, we're having a few problems with 60% fat. So she described a modified MCT diet at 30% fat, and the other 30% of the fat component of the ketogenic diet, she switched to LCT fat. And then in 2009, in the Liz Neal study, where we looked at the efficacy of ketogenic diets, and actually in that study, so the study was looking at ketogenic diets versus a medication. They also compared the the MCT diet and a classical diet, and she used a 45% MCT diet. As you can see, that's nicely positioned between 30% and 60%. And I would put to you that it's pitched there because 30% might have been a little bit low, and so to have that comparison, we went for 45%. And in the study, it had the same efficacy of the classical diet at 3 months and at 6 months. But of course, those of you who've used MCT, you'll be well aware it has some advantages and it has some disadvantages. So just looking at the advantages first, LCT fat being water soluble can pull a little bit of water in through the gastric tract, and so you get a little bit of diarrhea, you get a looser stool. So in this population, we tend to have constipation, and that can be a real positive. Of course, if we get too much loose stool, it's a disadvantage. We get diarrhea. If we've only had to use 60% or 45% of our energy as MCT fat, that gives us more energy to give as protein and carbohydrate. So on this diet, you can have greater quantities of carbohydrate. You can normally allow some normal cow's milk. So if you've got a child who loves cow's milk, they might comply better because there are some more of their normal foods. And you can often accommodate extras of carbohydrate. I call them extras because the diet you're going to calculate doesn't have extras. But I would put to you that in this diet, you've got some flexibility. The disadvantages, have any of you ever had a lot of MCT? Yeah. Can I ask what your experience was?
I had to lie very flat, not to throw up.
Yeah, so you often get abdominal cramps and discomfort, and you can feel quite nauseous. Yeah. And so as the percentage goes up, that is something to look out for, because obviously people are not going to comply with something that makes them feel so dreadful. Our teenagers tell us there can be a mouthfeel with MCT fat, so they're fine for the first few months, and then everything is not quite so good. And when you're cooking with MCT fat, and I think Neil talked about this earlier, it has a lower flash point, so you can ignite it in the frying pan or in the oven more quickly, or particularly in the microwave. So quite often putting in some long-chain fats into your MCT fat, you'll raise the flash point and easier for cooking. Any of you who wear glasses, if you cook with MCT fat, at the end of the session, you'll have a film of fat on your glasses. You know it's smoking off, even if you haven't actually set fire to it. It's not a challenge, by the way, to set fire to it. But so I'd like to move on to how we calculate the diet. And so what I'd like you to do in this session is actually look at the diet as done in the trial, which was described back in 2009. And so this was a very tight energy prescription diet where all carbohydrate is measured in the diet, the MCT is measured in the diet, the protein is measured in the diet, and the long-chain fats are measured in the diet. So it's really quite a tight affair. And on your sheets, I'll just very quickly run through what you're going to see. So first of all, with any ketogenic diet, you would calculate the energy you want to give. And on your sheet, we're going to look at 1,600 calories. And then you want to choose the initial starting point of your percentage of any from MCT. So you're then going to work through how much of your energy you're going to give to MCT fat. And then we're going to decide how much of the rest of the energy is coming from protein, carbohydrate, and your long-chain fats. So this is a little small, but you've actually got a printout in front of you. So when we're thinking about the energy content of MCT fat, the European guidelines are that we consider it to be 9 calories per gram. Now, some of you will have read in the literature that the amount ranges from about 7.5 through to about 9.1, depending on which study. Sorry, not 9.1, about 8.7. But from a regulation point of view, the figure you would use is 9 calories per gram. So having then worked out the calories you have for 45, well, if we're going to use 45%, how many calories that is, divide by 9, and that will give you the amount of MCT that you're going to give. Likewise, for looking at the amount of protein a day, the amount of carbohydrate and the amount of fat. So the amount of energy in a gram of protein, we consider 4 calories. The amount for carbohydrate, I would advise that you also have that as 4 calories, and then the LCT fat as 9 calories. On an MCT diet, because the MCT fat doesn't have that regulation for making ketones, you need to ensure that it's spread out throughout the day. So we'd recommend that you take your MCT fat and divide by 4 for your 4 portions a day. So 1 at breakfast, 1 at lunch, 1 at tea, and 1 before bed. And 1 gram of MCT oil, consider as 1 mil. So if you're using a pure oil, 1 gram is 1 mil. If you're using an emulsion like Liquigen, which is half water, half oil, then you have 2 grams of 50% MCT emulsion is Liquigen. The Better Quick is a 1 in 5 emulsion. So for every so it's a 20%. And then if you're using MCT Procal powder, you've got 1.6 grams in, it's giving you 1 gram, 1.6 grams of Procal powder. So they come in 16 gram sachets, and that gives you 10 grams of MCT fat. So you could add, when you're doing your recipe, so what we're going to do is ask you to do a menu for, do your calculation, decide how you're going to spread it through the day, and then we're actually going to ask you to do an MCT lunch. So you could use any of those MCT sources, but if you know that 1 sachet is 10 grams of MCT fat. Does that make sense? And I think Neil was asking for some clever ideas with your MCT oil. So the choices are the lists that you've got. So protein exchanges are at 6 grams of protein. Carbohydrate exchanges on your lists are 1 gram exchanges, 5 gram exchanges, or 10 gram exchanges. And your LCT fats are in 5 gram exchanges. And so you'd spread those throughout the day. And if you've got your phones and you've done your calculation and you just want to see if it is right, then do load up the VitaFlow app. And you'll find that it calculates it out. And the nice thing about this app is once you know how to work out the diet from scratch, and you don't want to do the maths, this app does the maths for you. So you just pick your percentages and it just tells you how much you need of each of those 4 nutrients. So you're then going to spread the MCT throughout the day, put in your long chain fats, your protein and your carbohydrates as you would do in your own clinical practice. And then we're going to devise a lunch. Okay. We good to go? Yes, sorry.